Why Jonathan Brandis took his own life. Just before midnight on November 11th, 2003, his friends walked into a Los Angeles apartment and found a scene that would forever change how the world remembered Jonathan Brandis. Not long before that night, he had been everywhere, on movie screens, magazine covers, and bedroom walls, one of the most recognizable faces of the late 80s and early 90s. Roles like The Never-Ending Story 2, Ladybugs, and seaQuest DSV didn't just make him famous. They turned him into a teen phenomenon almost overnight. But what happens when childhood fame locks you into an image you can't escape, and the phone stops ringing before you're ready? This is the haunting story of how Hollywood created a heartthrob, and how that same spotlight quietly pushed him toward tragedy. Born in April 1976 in Connecticut, Jonathan Brandis seemed like a child Hollywood was bound to notice. He had that wide-eyed, camera-ready look, and his parents leaned into it early, placing him in print ads before he was even 2. By 4, he was already appearing in television commercials, and everything pointed toward a smooth climb upward. That climb picked up speed when he was just 6 years old. Brandis landed the role of Kevin Buchanan on One Life to Live, a breakthrough that changed his family's life almost overnight. Convinced their son's future was in entertainment, they took a gamble and moved from the East Coast to Los Angeles a few years later. Once there, Jonathan quickly became a familiar face, popping up on popular shows like The Wonder Years and Full House, steadily building a resume most kids his age could only dream of. Then came the role that would define him. In the late 1980s, casting began for The Never-Ending Story 2. The original film had been released years earlier, and its young cast had long since outgrown their roles, opening the door for a new generation. By this point, 13-year-old Brandis was eager to shed his little kid image and move into more mature parts. He had already auditioned for projects like Saved by the Bell, even coming close to landing a role, only to be passed over at the last minute. Winning The Never-Ending Story. 2 felt like the answer to everything. More than 600 young actors auditioned, but it was Jonathan who emerged with the lead role of Bastian Balthazar Bucks, the lonely, imaginative boy who escapes into the magical world of Fantasia. Overnight, he went from a busy child actor to a full-blown teen star, exactly the leap he'd been hoping for. The experience, however, was far from easy. Director George T. Miller was anxious about strict child labor rules slowing production, so he pushed the cast hard. Scenes were often rehearsed only once before filming, with multiple cameras rolling at the same time to capture every angle. It was intense, demanding work, especially for someone so young. Still, Brandis handled it like a professional. Each challenge became another rung on the ladder, another step toward the career he believed he was building. Even though The Never-Ending Story 2 failed to light up the box office, Jonathan Brandis didn't fade with it. In fact, the same year the film was released, he took on one of the most unsettling roles of his young career, playing the childhood version of Bill Denbrough in the television adaptation of It. The miniseries became a cultural moment, terrifying audiences nationwide, with Tim Curry delivering an unforgettable turn as Pennywise. Years later, Brandis admitted that Bill Denbrough was the most difficult role he'd ever tackled, especially mastering the character's stutter without turning it into caricature. Still, that challenge paled in comparison to what came next. For much of his early teen career, casting directors fixated on one thing: his height. When he filmed Sidekicks in 1992 alongside Chuck Norris, Brandis stood just around 5'4", often pigeonholed into younger roles because of it. Then, almost overnight, everything changed. Brandis hit a major growth spurt, eventually reaching about 5'9", and with that physical change came a dramatic shift in how Hollywood saw him. In 1993, his career took a defining turn when he landed a starring role on seaQuest DSV, later retitled seaQuest 2032. Set aboard a futuristic submarine and executive produced by Steven Spielberg, the series cast Brandis as Lucas Wolinchak, a teenage prodigy whose brilliance often outpaced the adults around him. On paper, a television series offered stability, a chance to settle into a long-term role after years of jumping from project to project. In reality, it became something else entirely. seaQuest's first season was a ratings hit, but Brandis quickly emerged as its breakout star, even standing out next to veteran actor Roy Scheider. Teen viewers, especially girls, tuned in week after week largely for him. Before long, Tiger Beat crowned him the #1 dreamboat, cementing his status as a full-blown teen idol. The attention soon escalated beyond anything he or his family had experienced before. Fans began showing up at the studio just to see him walk to his car. The crowds grew so intense that Brandis needed multiple security guards to escort him off set every day. Magazine interviews piled up. Public appearances multiplied. At the height of his fame, he was reportedly receiving as many as 4,000 fan letters a week. In interviews from that period, Jonathan Brandis often sounded overwhelmed by how quickly his life had changed, like someone caught in headlights with no time to step aside. "I never perceived myself like this. A teen magazine kid," he once admitted. "As an actor, you just hope to continue working. I sure never knew it was coming." The attention arrived all at once, and no one had prepared him for what that kind of visibility really meant. Still, those around him believed he handled it better than most. His seaQuest co-star, Roy Scheider, said Brandis kept his feet on the ground, noting that he takes his incredible popularity with a grain of salt. Scheider couldn't resist adding one playful caveat, though. Other than the fact he uses it to get girls. Fame may have been confusing, but it was also intoxicating, and Brandis was young enough to enjoy parts of it. By the mid-1990s, his personal life was suddenly under as much scrutiny as his career. At just 19, Brandis had finally shaken the label of child star. But teen stardom brought its own complications. Around that time, he began a relationship with Fresh Prince of Bel-Air actress Tatiana Ali, though their connection was complicated from the very beginning. When they first met at a friend's Halloween party in 1993, Ali was only 14, while Brandis was 17. Beyond the age gap, his level of fame made things even more uncomfortable. As Ali later explained, he was older, probably a lot more experienced. It was uncomfortable. It took time for both of them to feel ready. 2 years later, when Brandis was 19 and Ali had turned 16, they finally decided to give the relationship a real chance. Almost instantly, Hollywood latched on. The young couple became tabloid gold, with cameras and gossip magnifying every move they made. Instead of easing the pressure, the attention only intensified it. Brandis, already struggling with constant recognition, now found himself navigating public jealousy as well. In a 1996 interview with People, he vented his frustration. "We go to a club, and 9 times out of 10 there's a guy there hitting on her." Fame had turned even simple nights out into emotional minefields. At the same time, the show that made him famous was quietly unraveling. While seaQuest's first season had been a ratings success, chaos ruled behind the scenes. By the time the pilot aired, 2 executive producers had already walked away. Rumors swirled of conflicts between the cast, NBC, and the remaining production team. The glossy image viewers saw on screen hit a workplace riddled with tension and instability. And as difficult as all of that was, Jonathan Brandis was about to discover that the real turmoil was only just beginning. The second season of seaQuest was both a lifeline and a warning sign. On one hand, The show had survived long enough to earn a renewal. On the other, the same problems that haunted the first season only grew worse, especially after NBC decided to overhaul the series and move production from Los Angeles to Orlando. Almost overnight, Brandis's job and his sense of stability were thrown into uncertainty. The changes didn't stop at geography. The network reshuffled the cast aggressively, forcing 2 actors out of their roles. Soon after, 2 more cast members walked away on their own, frustrated by the relocation and the same behind-the-scenes tensions that had already made Season 1 so chaotic. What was supposed to be a fresh start quickly felt like a slow collapse. Brandis, at least for the moment, managed to avoid the worst of it. Ironically, one of the main reasons NBC wanted to revamp seaQuest was because of him. His massive popularity after the first season convinced the network to skew the show younger in hopes of pulling in even more teen viewers. While others were pushed aside, Brandis was kept front and center. He was even given a rare opportunity. Recognizing his importance to the series, producers allowed him to write an episode himself. Titled The Siamese Dream, it aired as episode 20 of Season 2 and marked a creative milestone for Brandis, who had always taken his work seriously and wanted to grow beyond being just a face on a poster. But one strong episode couldn't save a sinking ship. The deeper the show went, the more unstable it became. By Season 3, seaQuest was in full crisis mode. Producers kept reinventing the concept, shifting tone, storylines, and even the setting in desperate attempts to stop the bleeding. The chaos reached a breaking point when lead actor Roy Scheider openly clashed with producers and fought to be released from his contract. By then, the damage was irreversible. Ratings continued to fall, and much of the original cast was gone. Brandis found himself in a strange position, still wildly popular as a teen idol, yet tethered to a show that was unraveling in real time. By the 3rd season, he was the only actor to appear in every episode and one of just 3 remaining from the original lineup. Brandis remained loyal, perhaps feeling indebted to NBC for giving him his biggest break and trusting him with creative control. He showed up every day determined to give the role everything he had. What he got in return was brutal and sudden. With little warning, and in the middle of the 3rd season, NBC pulled the plug. seaQuest was canceled outright. From the outside, it still looked like Jonathan Brandis had everything going for him. But behind the scenes, the foundation beneath him had just collapsed. At the time, almost no one saw what was coming. When Brandis walked away from seaQuest, it looked like he was doing so at the peak of his momentum. He was still firmly part of Hollywood's inner circle, surrounded by some of the most recognizable young stars of the 1990s. One of his closest friends was fellow former child star Soleil Moon Frye, who had grown up in the spotlight as Punky Brewster. From the outside, his life still looked full, busy, and promising. And in many ways, it was. Over the next few years, Brandis stayed working, exactly what he had always wanted. He moved through a steady run of television movies and then into supporting roles in feature films, including Outside Providence and Ang Lee's Ride with the Devil. For an actor who measured success not by fame, but by simply being cast, this consistency mattered. It felt like proof that he was still moving forward. But quietly, the ground was starting to shift. As the new millennium approached, the work became less reliable. While Outside Providence and Ride with the Devil made it to theaters, his next project, Bad Girls from Valley High, ran into serious trouble. The film struggled to secure a distributor and sat in release limbo for years, effectively vanishing before audiences ever saw it. For Brandis, it was a discouraging sign that opportunities were slipping away. At the same time, his personal life took a painful hit. In 2001, after 6 years together, Brandis and Tatiana Ali ended their relationship. The reasons stayed private, but the loss was profound. The breakup left him more isolated than he'd been in years, at a moment when he needed stability and support the most. Then came what seemed like a lifeline. In 2002, Brandis landed a supporting role in Heart's War, starring Bruce Willis alongside rising star Colin Farrell. It looked like the kind of high-profile project that could reset his trajectory. Better still, it was clearly headed for a wide theatrical release, something Brandis desperately needed. But the hope didn't last. When the final cut was completed, Brandis received devastating news. Most of his performance had been removed. His role was reduced so drastically that he appeared only in a deleted scene. The film came out without him. By that point, Brandis had placed enormous emotional weight on Heart's War. It wasn't just about career momentum. It was about reassurance, about feeling seen and valued again. Having that taken away left him crushed. Still, somehow, he found the strength to stand back up one more time. In 2003, Brandis made one more push into television, landing a role in 111 Gramercy Park, a new series that paired him with familiar faces like Tippi Hedren and Jaleel White, forever remembered as Urkel from Family Matters. The show centered on the lives of maintenance and cleaning staff working inside a high-end Manhattan apartment building. For Brandis, it felt like another chance to steady his footing. All that stood between him and a comeback was the pilot, and the hope that a network would say yes. But by this point, the strain was already showing. Jaleel White later spoke openly about how anxious Brandis was during filming. He recalled that Brandis seemed consumed by uncertainty, repeatedly asking whether White thought the show had any real chance of being picked up. As White put it, "I've never known an actor to ask me repeatedly about our pickup prospects the way he did when we shot the show." It wasn't ambition anymore. It was fear. In the end, those fears were realized. No network picked up 111 Gramercy Park. Once again, Brandis found himself cut loose, drifting further from the industry that had defined his entire life. With Bad Girls from Valley High still stuck in release limbo and offers drying up, the rejection hit harder than ever. Those close to him later said the spiral had started earlier, possibly after learning that his role in Heart's War had been nearly erased. Brandis began coping in destructive ways, drinking heavily as his depression deepened. The loneliness he felt wasn't just professional, it was personal, emotional, and relentless. Then came the moment that alarmed those around him most. Friends would later reveal that Brandis, normally described as gentle, polite, and easygoing, began telling people outright that he was thinking about taking his own life. Even for those who knew how much pressure he was under, the confession was shocking. Still, many believed, hoped, that things would turn around. There was reason to hope. Despite everything, Brandis landed a substantial role in Puerto Vallarta Squeeze, playing a CIA hitman opposite Harvey Keitel. It was the kind of part actors dream of, dark, complex, and far removed from his teen idol image. On set, Brandis was focused and professional, pushing his struggles aside to do the work. Keitel took notice immediately. Producer Robert Katz later recalled Keitel repeatedly saying, "This kid is good." In the editing room, the optimism continued. Katz remembered people saying, "This guy's going to have a big career." But belief from others wasn't enough. By November 2003, filming had wrapped, and Brandis should have been looking ahead, toward premieres, press, and renewed opportunity. Instead, the weight of past disappointments overwhelmed him. He'd been hopeful before, only to watch those hopes collapse. This time, it was more than he could carry. What came next wasn't a comeback, but a devastating end. Just before midnight on November 11th, 2003, friends went to check on Jonathan Brandis at his Los Angeles apartment. And what they found stopped everything cold. He was discovered unconscious in the hallway. In a panic, they called 911 and paramedics rushed him to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, hoping there was still time to save him. There wasn't. Though Brandis briefly held on, doctors confirmed the following day that he had died. He was just 27 years old. The news sent shock waves through Hollywood. Puerto Vallarta Squeeze producer Robert Katz later said his first reaction was disbelief. No, 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 wrong guy. Jaleel White, who had worked closely with Brandis on 111 Gramercy Park, described sitting at his computer in tears, struggling to process what had happened. For many who knew him, it simply didn't feel real. Others reacted in more complicated ways. Tatiana Ali, Brandis's former girlfriend, reportedly admitted that her initial response was anger, a raw, human reaction shaped by grief, unfinished emotions, and the fact that their long relationship had ended only a few years earlier. For some, the loss came with a heavy sense of guilt. Brandis's longtime friend, Soleil Moon Frye, later shared that she wrestled with feeling like she hadn't fully seen what he was going through, or reached out deeply enough when it mattered most. Really hearing what someone is saying, as she put it. Years later, Frye found a way to honor him. In 2021, she released the documentary Kid 90, built from hundreds of hours of home video she filmed during her youth in Hollywood. Brandis appears often in the footage, laughing, relaxed, alive in moments the public never saw. The film reintroduced him to the world not as a headline or a tragedy, but as a real person, frozen in time. Still, no documentary could ease the pain for those closest to him, or quiet the lingering questions surrounding his death. For his family and friends, the loss of Jonathan Brandis wasn't just the end of a promising career. It was the heartbreaking loss of someone they loved, and a reminder of how quietly someone can struggle even when the world once couldn't stop watching. The same year Kid 90 was released, Jonathan Brandis's father, Greg, spoke publicly about his son's death for the first time. What he said surprised many people. Despite Jonathan's very real struggles with fame and a shrinking career, Greg was clear that he didn't believe Hollywood itself was the cause. In his words, his son's death wasn't due to the entertainment industry. Instead, Greg pointed to something far more painful and far more personal. He believed Jonathan had been battling an undiagnosed mental illness. Looking back with the clarity of hindsight, Greg admitted, "I look back now, and in his 20s he showed signs of manic depression. He came to believe that bipolar disorder played a significant role in the downward spiral that ultimately led to Jonathan taking his own life. Jonathan's presence didn't disappear after his death. In many ways, it lingered quietly in the industry he had grown up in." Puerto Vallarta Squeeze was released posthumously in 2004, allowing audiences to see one of his final performances. The following year, Bad Girls from Valley High, a film that had been stuck in limbo for years, was finally released straight to video, a bittersweet reminder of how close Jonathan had been to a comeback. For his father, the loss never faded. Even decades later, Greg Brandis said he still feels connected to his son. In a 2021 interview, he shared, "I talk to him, and it makes me smile. I get the feeling he's looking down at me." It was a quiet, tender confession from a parent still learning how to live with unimaginable grief. Jonathan Brandis's legacy is complicated, shaped by the extremes of Hollywood life. Overnight fame, crushing expectations, professional uncertainty, and silent battles with mental health. But his story, Greg insists, should not end in tragedy alone. His hope is that by telling Jonathan's truth, it might reach someone who is struggling and encourage them to seek help. In that way, his son's life and loss can still mean something. The memory of Jonathan Brandis was also preserved by the thousands of fans who used social media to create far-reaching fan pages and edits of the star. Today, these posts celebrate the star's life, career, and legacy as a Hollywood star lost too soon.